Good crowd tonight. And all of those of you in Zoom land. I'm Bill Marvin, one of the past presidents of the Historic Society. Couple items of business to do. First of all, coming up on March 10th is our very famous, well-known Cabin Fever Dinner. Going to be a little different this year. I think you'll like it. But there are tickets available, I think, in the back, right, Marianne? Yes. And it will be on March 10th. Sunday, the doors open at 5, and it will be a program and some entertainment, a little bit of trivia, and a kind of a different meal this year. But we're going to have a great time, and it's a great time to get out and meet with the other folks from Mackinaw City. Welcome to tonight's program. We've been doing a series of lectures at these Monday night series of businesses or institutions that have been around historically in Mackinaw City for a long time. And tonight, we're going to be talking about St. Anthony's Padua. And it's always tough to introduce a friend. And Chris and I have been friends for a long time. And I was trying to think of different things to say. And just by a coincidence, I'll call it, I happened to come up with this magazine. I don't know how many of you have ever seen it. It was published in the summer of 2001.
Wow, 20.
And 2021. I won't add another 20 years to it. 2021. And it talks about a young woman whom her mother kind of described as a bit lippy, who went into the convent 60-some years before this article was written. 60-some years as a sister in the Dominican Order of Nuns. Now that in itself, to me, is amazing enough. But then I found out, reading through this, in that 60 years, Sister Chris holds undergraduate degrees in mathematics and biology. She holds a master's degree in biology, a master's degree in microbiology, has done doctoral work in microbiology, also has a master's in pastoral theology, which led her, as she says in the article, God leads her around. She never knows where she's going. Sometimes she thinks she does, but she doesn't. And God has led her on some very different paths. She was a teacher. She enjoyed doing that, but then she got into dealing with older folks and did some stints in various places doing that. Then she got into the administrative end with the pastoral theology degree. She got into what's called pastoral administration. And she came to us in 2000 as a pastoral administrator to a church that was having some difficulties. And now in the article, by the way, she divulges a secret. And it's probably something none of you knew. She divulges the fact that she's somewhat of a control freak. It just shocked me. Absolutely shocked me. But officially, in fact, something else I didn't know, Georgie is her actual first name. Didn't know that, Georgie Harold. And she is officially Sister Anne Christopher of the Dominican Nuns, known and loved by us as Sister Chris. Yes. And she's going to talk to us tonight about St. Padua. St. Anthony. Come on up, Chris.
I go by many aliases. My mother and dad had me baptized Georgie Ann, because that coincidentally was the name of both of my grandmothers. And nobody else in either family had ever dared to name their daughter after them because they would be called Georgie Girl all their life. So I didn't really care for the name. When I entered the Grand Rapids Dominicans, I was given the name Sister Ann Christopher. When I got to Kalkaska in 1980 to work, those people thought that was quite a mouthful. So they're the ones who have shortened it to Chris. My insurance card says Ann. And once I was at a doctor's appointment in Petoskey, and Chris Harwick was with me, and they came out in looking for Ann among the people who were sitting out there. And I got up and walked into the doctor's office, and I came out, and Chris says, "What the heck was that?" So I go by many aliases, and I frequently, if people say, "Oh, are you Sister Chris?" I say, "You must be talking about my twin." So there we go. I have been in Mackinaw City since August the 3rd of 2000. How did I get here? Really, a couple different ways. Number one, the bishop at the time, who's now deceased, and I were good friends, and I told him I wanted this particular parish when the priest who was here retired. And he said, "And why would you want that parish?" And I said, "Because I have a love affair with the Mackinaw Bridge." And that is really what brought me here, was the bridge. As all of us who live here, we never get tired of looking at it. And so I was getting tired of driving from Higgins Lake up here to look at it. So that's how I kind of got here. Plus the fact that I knew that the parish needed some new blood and some younger blood. But remember, that was 25 years ago. Now I'm with the older blood. So there are people sitting out here in our audience tonight who probably know more about this parish than I do, because they were born and raised and lived here. They're only here to make sure I don't make any mistakes. And the real person who knows the history of this parish is Margaret Paquette. That was her master's thesis, the Catholicism in Mackinaw City, the Catholic Church in Mackinaw City. So a lot of what I have to say tonight is based on Margaret's research, and I did call her a couple times today to ask her some few questions, and so I can't remember. That was so long ago. But anyway, it worked. I suppose if you're going to talk about the Catholic Church in Mackinaw City, you have to go back to the 1600s or the 17th century, because that is when the missionaries began to come through, particularly the Jesuit missionaries. And one of the very significant ones was Father Pierre Marquette. He was also an explorer, so he had as much interest in canoeing the shores of the Great Lakes as he did this area in bringing the gospel message to the people, to the native tribes, really. Father Marquette, if you don't know, is also responsible for establishing the city of Sault Ste. Marie and St. Ignace. And he is buried in St. Ignace, and there is a memorial by the state police post to Father Marquette. Another very famous person who came through this area after the Jesuits was a Slovenian by the name of Bishop Beriga. When he came through this area, he was not yet a bishop. He was in Harbor Springs and Cross Village and that side of the state. And then he went on to be bishop of the entire Northwest Territory of the United States, which went all the way down into Illinois and Ohio. His mode of transportation was snowshoe. And they said he would walk over 700 miles in a winter in snowshoe. And he went by snowshoe because he wanted to remain kind of like inland, where the natives had set up their camps, and that way he could get directly to them. One of the things that he did was to learn their language, the language of the Ottawas and the Chippewas, and then he translated their language into an English dictionary and also translated several books on the Word of God, the Gospel, into their language so that they could learn. So without these early missionaries, we maybe wouldn't have what we have today in this area. In 1903, as the population began to grow because of the work of the early missionaries, the Catholics began to look for property. And they bought 6 lots. 6 lots from Conkling. And that was where the first church was built. The first church, it's my understanding, was located on Central Avenue. Work began, and by the year 1909, they were able to move into the church. I've tried to get somebody to do a property abstract study. Huh?
I said they don't do them anymore.
I know, but I wish they did, because what I've been told, Reed, is that our church, the first one, originally sat on the property where you're now located. And I'd love to know if that's true or false. So, but then we had a bishop in the Grand Rapids area, because we were considered part of the Grand Rapids Diocese, who determined that the church out on West Central Avenue was too far for the people who were in town to walk. Go figure. All right? So it was moved, lock, stock, and barrel, down to Jemay and Henry. Thank you, Carol. I thought it was Henry. And the house was, the rectory was built next to it. The rectory was about twice the size of the church, if you look at pictures. And once there was a rectory built, then a full-time resident priest moved into the area. That was in the year 1910, and that was Father George Nye, N-Y-E. He had been in Sheboygan. Now, there's also an interesting fact about the house. It is on the historical records. And I dare to say there's been a heck of a lot of revamping, remodeling, and unremodeling that's been done in that house that would have destroyed any of the historicity that was there. Another thing about that house is it is identical to a house in Republic, Michigan, which was a rectory, and that house is a Sears Roebuck house. Okay. And so my suspicion is if I ever got in the front door of that house, I would know exactly what the layout is, and it's another Sears Roebuck house. So how many of you knew that Sears Roebuck sold houses?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you knew that? Well, you're all older than, I mean, I didn't know that until I visited my friend who's a Franciscan sister in Republic, and she's living in that Sears Roebuck house right now, taking care of that church. So it was in the year 1910, on July 2nd, that the Bishop of Grand Rapids came to Mackinaw City, dedicated the church, and placed it under the patronage of St. Anthony of Padua. And some people pronounce it Padua. So I guess it depends if you're Italian or not. The Italians in Padua claim St. Anthony as theirs, though he is not. He's Portuguese. So, and he just ended up in Italy. He was an extremely famous preacher. And the story is told about him that he once was going to an ordination of some other Franciscans, and a group of Dominicans were there. Now, Dominicans, you know, we go by the title Order of Preachers. So if you ever see O.P. after my name, it does not mean Order of Police, but it's the Order of Preachers. and we take ourselves seriously as preachers of the word. Well, they get there, and whoever the person in charge was just thought automatically one with the Dominicans would preach, right? And so they asked who was going to be doing the preaching, and none of them volunteered. And their reason was because, well, they didn't know, and so they weren't prepared. And that was their excuse. We didn't prepare. Dominicans are also very heady people, okay? We love books. So if they had to use one of their own, and the one that they used, unprepared, was Anthony. And his sermon on that occasion was so wipe you off your feet, you know, that they just looked at him thereafter as their preacher. He has been elevated to the position of Doctor of the Church in the Catholic Church, which is probably one of the highest titles you can get, and continues to this day. He's the patron saint of miracles, and as we who are Catholic know, and some of my Protestant friends too, he's the guy who finds whatever you've lost, right? Patron saint of the lost and found. So, as I say, though, he is the patron saint who moves things around so that you think they're lost, but eventually you will find them.
Because you found it.
He moves them. So, there we go. So, it was placed under the patronage of St Anthony of Padua, and it remained a mission church to Sheboygan St. Mary's until the full-time priest moved in here. And at that time, St. Anthony's Church took over the church in Alverno. Y'all know where Alverno is?
It's a hike.
Hmm?
It's a hike.
Yeah, it is. And Afton. You know where Afton is?
Yeah.
Between Onaway and Indian River. So the church in Alverno and the church in Afton became mission churches of St. Anthony of Padua. At this time, there were probably about 30 families that made up the Catholic Church. And as years went on, the church grew, as did the population, and probably the peak of the population was when the bridge was being built. And then after that, we've seen it all kind of go downhill. There were a lot of pastors who came and went, some of them for periods of maybe 6 years, and some of them for maybe a year or two. Father Bayanowski was the longest ever priest to serve the parish. He was here 33 years. Now, Father Bayanowski, Bill told me when he asked me to do this, to don't leave out the dirt, okay? So, Father Bayanowski...
Thanks, Bill.
Huh?
Thanks.
Yeah, Father Bayanowski brought a little dirt with him. He had been assigned to a little village called Isidore in the Leelanau area of the state. And they had built a brand new school. They had Felician sisters from the Detroit area coming up to teach in this brand new school. And the principal of the school, as well as the mother superior of the house, was a young, attractive Felician sister who came up missing one day. And the body was found later under the church in the cold storage area. And she was pregnant with child. So it was her body and the body of a fetus that was found. I don't think it's ever been resolved as to who murdered her, whether it was the janitor who was always around, whether it was the housekeeper for Father Bayanowski, who was extremely jealous, or if it was Father Bayanowski himself. But he had an alibi. He was fishing at Lake Leelanau. Some people I know have read the book Isidore's Secret. Anybody in this room read it? You did? Okay. And so there's never, ever a final truth. You don't know who's covering up for who in that story. Is Father Bayanowski covering up for the housekeeper because She was so loyal to him for so many years. But it was after that incident, and he had gone through intensive investigation of all kinds, that he was moved from Isidore to Mackinaw City. Mackinaw City was the furthest point that you could get from the headquarters of the diocese in Grand Rapids, right? And that became true of a lot of the clergy who came through here, because we were also made up of the Saginaw Diocese. So to get a problem away, move it to the tip of the mitt. Now you know why I'm really here. But that's a part of the dirt. And there's more later, and I won't spare you of that. With Father Bajanowski, well, I should say, one of the things that he did that was extremely instrumental was establishing a building committee for the church that we are currently in. And that church was built, the headstone says 1959. Some of the men that were on that building committee, and I'm sure you will recognize names as I, go through the list for you. Raymond Daisy, remember that one? J.B. Marshall, remember the Marshall name? Lloyd Daisy, the artist. Leo Vashaw.
Yeah.
Louis Kelso. Bill Paquette. We all remember Bill. Robert Beauchamp. James McMillan. Charles Carty. Is that your dad, Carol? Okay. Thomas Alexander, the elder. That would be Bill's dad. And Joseph Paget. Now, get all those names? Not a single woman among them.
Those were the times.
And you know what? It looks like there was not a woman on that committee. A woman would have made a few changes. The other thing is, in 1959, when that church was built, Vatican II, that council, had just been called. And with it came a lot of moving forward in the faith. It can be called a church for the modern time, a church for the modern world. And Bajanowski tried to his best to kind of predict or project what was coming out of this, and I can tell that by some of the architecture that's connected with the building, that he was looking forward in trying to build in a forward way. The church cost $162,000 to build in those days. And I also find, going through the records, you'll find this one interesting, Bill, that pole barn was built in 1978. Can you believe? And it cost $5,800. And we're looking at now doing some renovations on it to a tune probably 8 times that amount. So,
Renovations.
but wow, 1978, that thing's been sticking down there. After his 32 or 33 years here, when Father Bajanowski died, he was buried at Lakeview Cemetery. And there's a humongous rock out in front by the house and the church sidewalk that has his name, his date, his death. He was from Poland, but he stayed here, in this country. He was followed by a notorious character, a priest from Lithuania who came to the United States, and his name was Father Joe Colonius. Some of you probably remember that name, right? He was famous for bazaars as fundraisers, and the stories they tell me is when the winners' tickets were drawn, he kind of like rearranged them, played a little shuffle on the table to see who got what. So, if you were a friend of his, then you were okay. And I heard that story from Ray Lacombe. How many of you remember Ray? Okay, so there were still raffles going on when I appeared in the year 2000, and Ray Lacombe came to the raffle. Not that he ever came to church on Sunday, but he came to the raffle to make sure that I was not fixing the winners like the priest before me. So let that one go. But he did a lot of good things in the church. He did a lot of renovation that was needed, and as we go through pictures at the end, you'll see what I'm talking about. He's the one who's responsible for the beautiful stained glass windows that we have. And he did a lot of landscaping, too. Case Demkoski was one of the people on that committee who went around knocking on doors, getting money to put in trees and other sorts of things. And he's the one who's responsible for the Lithuanian Wayside Cross. You remember that? You do? Okay. When I would look out the front window of the house, that was my view. And I'm thinking hard of how do I clear this out. And I get a phone call from him one day asking if I would mind if it was moved to the cemetery where he was going to be buried. To which I answered, "Oh, Father, I can't think of a better place for it." So he got his little Lithuanian friends together. Ruth Morse was on the city council at the time, and he wrote a letter to Ruth and asked her to present it to the council to get permission for him to move that down to Lakeview Cemetery. He was followed by another Lithuanian priest, Father Leonard Joyce, who probably goes down in history as the dirt, okay? The embezzler. So when I came here, the records for the parish finances had all been sequestered by the state police. And they were going through it, tooth comb, toothbrush, everything, just to find ways he had spent money that were not church related. He was prosecuted, and he did have to pay back a certain amount of that money to the diocesan insurance company, which would have covered him. And I remember Bill Paquette one day saying, they got number 2, but number 1 got away. So I'm like, what? Explain that to me. So then he told me. But, you know, as I talked to other people over the years, that was the way things were in their country. If it belonged to the church, it belonged to the priest. And that's just the way they operated here in this country. Nothing different. And that was from a good friend of Father Joe's, who was also a good friend of mine. So, through the years, the parish has grown, and then it peaked with the building of the bridge, as probably all of the churches around here did. Businesses peaked. Businesses had their heyday. They built more businesses in town, and then now the bridge is not as popular anymore as it was at that time. So population has dropped off, and enrollment in our school has dropped off. And I wonder where Mackinaw City goes from here. What does it do to revitalize itself, to bring the crowds back? I followed Father Leonard Joyce, and I've been here for darn near a quarter of a century, counting the days. For the quarter century mark.
Good.
But as I read through all of the history, I would have to say that the thing that has brought the Catholics of St. Anthony of Padua through all of their ups and downs has been the faith of the people. If it were not for the faith of the people, there wouldn't be a church there. But you know, they dealt with a pastor of 32 years who may or may not have murdered a Felician sister. They dealt with the Lithuanian priests who may or may not have taken all of their money. But they stayed firm as a group, and they are still very, very firm in their faith today. They're dealing with me, so that ought to tell you something about them, right? But it's really, without the laity, and this is true of every single church, if you don't have your congregation deep in their faith, your church is not going to prosper. The church will not prosper. And if they are deep in their faith, that church will always be there. It's not going anyplace. You can't turn it off. If you've got God, you've got God. And he's not going anyplace. So I'm especially privileged and blessed, I believe, to be here. Privileged to live in this area, but blessed by the wonderful people that I get to work with every single day. There are different styles of leadership. There is the style of pay, pray, and obey, Father. And then there's my style of leadership, which is delegate. And don't try to micromanage, even if you are a control freak. Right? It's, the more we can delegate, the more responsibility the people take for what is theirs. Pastors come and go. I don't intend to die here. I don't intend to be buried with Father Joe and Father John down at Lakefield Cemetery. But as long as I have health and God's grace, I'll probably be here. You're going to have to look at me maybe for half a century. I don't know the way it's going. But I do believe that all of the changes over the years, in no matter what church you might be in, only makes for a stronger, more committed membership. If you can stick with the changes and not run away, but let them lead you and let them teach you, you'll be good people, strong people, and your churches will survive and thrive. So, any questions? I did find this in the records. You know, if there's anybody in this group that likes to play around with history stuff, I have a whole drawer of stuff that needs to be arranged in a historical order. It's all in a file drawer, and now if you could see the office floor, that would be something else. But this was a letter that Father Bayanowski wrote in 1958. And I want you to listen to this as if you were hearing it directed to you. My dear parishioner, for the first time in a generation, your pastor finds it necessary to call upon you to make a substantial sacrificial gift to the parish. I appeal to you to give serious thought to the amount of your contribution to the new St. Anthony's Church. I ask you to make sacrifices, not of the necessities of life, but the luxuries. The committee who called on you the week of July 27 is my personal representative. He is doing the work of the church. He, got it? He is doing the work of the church for the greater honor and glory of God. Receive him kindly, generously, and in all fraternal charity. May the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit descend upon you and yours and remain forever. Amen. Now, if I sent that out to St. Anthony's parishioners today, what do you think would happen? And then he goes on to talk about the past of the parish with the missionaries, setting the faith in place, the early pastors, himself, and the fact that we need a new church. That's just the way it was. At the time he wrote this, the church was so small, and again, population booming because of the bridge. They had 6 services on a weekend to accommodate everybody. Yeah.
One priest.
One priest.
Outside.
And outside, Carol?
Yes.
Okay. I'm open to any questions. Yes.
Can you talk about the latest renovation with the cross in the front of the church?
Yeah, I can. This is one of the things that we pride ourselves on. We are the site of many original pieces of art in this area, okay? And I have brochures up here that y'all can take home. But you're speaking specifically of the cross that hangs in the sanctuary. That cross was designed by Ann Gildner, who is the former owner of the Coop Florist Shop in Sheboygan. It was executed by Moran Ironworks in Onaway. It weighs 1,875 pounds. It is of stainless steel. And it took about 10 men to carry it into the church when it was brought in to be hung. Now, as a Catholic, you're probably wondering why there's not a corpus on it. Is that part of your question?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay, then I don't have to answer.
So answer that question.
Huh?
So answer that question.
I will answer that question. With Catholic liturgy, it's required that you have a corpus somewhere in the sanctuary while you're doing the worship service. We have that, and it's on a processional cross that leads everybody in before Mass begins. The big cross on the back wall was meant to be a statement, so that when you walked in the front doors, you knew that you were in a place of worship. It's larger than I thought the finished product was going to be, but I'm okay with it. I was just like, oh. It doesn't have a corpus, specifically because when we look at a corpus, that's kind of where it stops. Jesus died for me on the cross. We forget that he also rose from the dead. And we forget that because of him, we are who we are. He created us. And this cross allows people's imagination to go beyond all of that, and it deepens their relationship with God. And that was the purpose for that, not having a corpus. I remember one day an elderly woman came back from Florida. She walked in the front door, looked up, saw that cross, turned around, and was going to leave because she thought she was in the wrong building. We had done that while she was gone. But I've had people come to me and say they see the gouging of the stainless steel, and it looks like a fingerprint when you get up close to it. And that reminds that individual that God has her fingerprint. And she, through baptism, has her fingerprint on him. A little 12-year-old looked at where the two crosses, cross each other. Probably not the best fingers to use, I don't know. But anyway, there's a little opening in there, a little cave. And she said to me, I see a fish. I looked at her and I said, a fish? Yes, sister. You look, right there in that opening. That's the fish of the early Christians. That was their symbol. 12 years old. Now, I missed it. It's nothing new. But I had another guy come by 3 or 4 years later, and he said, it's the eye of the needle. I know it is.
Oh.
Everybody sees something different. Somebody who was, again, a summer parishioner looked at the way the crosses are. They're kind of bending over each other. And she sent me an email in the afternoon after she got back home, and she said, I look at that, and I think of that song, Hosea, the verse from Scripture, trees must bend, though straight and tall, so must we to others call. And she said that for her was a reminder that there are many times when she has to bend her opinion and listen to other people. And then somebody else immediately says, I see two crosses. The one Jesus carried for me, and the one that he asks me to carry for him. And everybody looks at it in a very, very different way. Some people have seen Lord of the Dance in the way those things come together. A friend of mine came through and she says, well, that's a real statement on community. And I said, what? And she said, look, on the arms, this arm has one nail alone. This arm has another nail alone. The feet, the nail goes through both. We cannot live without each other. We can't be alone in this world. I had a woman come to me and say, this is the most Protestant thing I've ever seen. Well, that just got my ire up. So I said, do you think so? You come here with me. And I take her up to the front. And I said, this is what people have seen. And I said, now, if you don't see anything in this cross, and if it doesn't somehow deepen your relationship with God, then I want you to sit here for the next half hour until you do. And I walked away. There's something there for everybody. You know, somebody else has come in from Sheboygan and they look at the panels in the back that are lit up. That for them is the corpuscles of Christ, his blood moving for us. Other people look at it and say, it's a reminder that even in the darkness, there is light. So, Dick Alexander, if you remember him, was insistent that it was the ascension. And I sat there and I argued with him one day. He says, come on, tell me it really is. I says, Dick, it's what you want it to be. Well, you know what the artist had intended. I said, Dick, it's what you want it to be. Well, I know it's the ascension. Just go ahead, tell me it's the ascension. I said, Dick, it's not the ascension for me. Now, what is it for you? So, I don't know what he ever concluded in the end, but yeah.
Probably that you're quite stubborn and he couldn't convince you.
Yeah, you're probably right, Bill. Yeah. But we do have in our church a lot of original pieces of art. The cross is one of them, and there will never be another one like it, ever. That's the promise we have with Onaway, with Moran Iron Works. However, the mock-up, the very first one that was done, is hanging on the front of the house of Vera Gildner on Lincoln Street by Sheboygan Smith. And when she dies, that will go to the cemetery where her husband is buried, and it'll be there between the two of them. So that was Anne's plan. Our stained glass represents the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church: baptism, Eucharist, confirmation, anointing of the sick, ordination, marriage, and reconciliation. The window on reconciliation had to be moved when we did the renovation to add on the hall. There also is in the sanctuary a icon of Rubloff's Trinity of the Old Testament. There will never be another one like that because I won't be doing it. Okay? So my friend Jane Cardinal and I did that. And then in the back of the church we have what we call Our Lady of the Straits. And that is an original piece also done by Jane in memory of Bill Morrison. And the door that it is in, or the frame I should say, was a confessional door from Holy Childhood Church in Harbor Springs, which was carved, hand-carved in 1830. So, and we know that Bishop Barriga went through that door. St. Catherine Drexel, who gave a lot of her wealth to the Native Americans here in northern Michigan, went through those doors. So we are one of a kind in more ways than one. Does that answer your question about the cross?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's whatever you want to see in it. Sit up closer. You'll see more.
Do you know where I sit?
Yeah.
Did you have some pictures, Chris?
Oh, I do. Thank you, Bill. After Sandy did all the hard work of putting them together for me. This is the very first church from 1910. 1910. 1910, which was located on what we think was Reed Nelson's property. It was moved downtown, and there it is, now on Henry Street. And next to it is the Sears Roebuck House, which I want to get inside. I would love for us to buy that thing back. It probably won't happen. There's your first pastor, Father George Nye, who came from Sheboygan. And there is the 33 years serving pastor, Father Andrew Bayanowski. And he was 82 years old when he finished building that church, believe it or not. This is what St. Anthony's looked like many years ago before the stained glass window was put in the balcony. And those wooden doors with the 3 windows were still there when I got there. They went after a period of time. But look at on the residence part where the brick is, you see the cinder block not finished. That's the way things were in the beginning. It's our church bulletin. I'm ashamed to say we've got the same one since 1978. I saw that and I thought, oh God, time for a change. But notice the bridge in the background.
Saw that.
Yeah, and the trees have certainly grown up over the years. There is the lovely building committee without women. And of all of the guys, I don't know, you might be able to pick out your dad, Carol.
We're looking for him.
Are you? I can pick out Bill Paquette, but that's about all, because I didn't really know any of the others.
I don't see him in
And Pun Marshall's the third from the left in the back.
Third from the left on the back.
Standing.
Great. Ray Daisy's with.
I think Bill is the 4th one from the right.
He is, and in front of him is Kelso.
Yeah.
Kelso?
That's Lee Kelso.
Okay.
And Lloyd Daisy is 2 over from him with glasses. short
Okay.
back.
All right.
And Beauchamp is the same. Beauchamp, and he was superintendent here.
Oh.
That's what
Don't see him.
This is construction beginning. They were advised not to put a basement in because it's all a clay ridge behind us from us to the lake, and so water doesn't drain through clay. All right, but the men knew better.
Pushes walls.
Here are the trusses going up. That's the house. People say to me, well, what year was the house built? It was built at the same time. So. There's the groundbreaking. I kind of suspect those little kids might be a couple Paquette kids.
Oh, Daisies.
Are they
That was
Daisies?
I don't
Daisy,
know if they
because
are.
that's Ray to the
Close
right of
enough to
father.
see.
Pardon me?
That's Ray to the right of father.
Okay, so then maybe it
It's
is
probably
Daisy kids.
just the,
And that's probably Lloyd to the left. That's probably all Daisy's just here.
yeah.
Okay, got that one solved. Here's the inside when it was finished. Doesn't it look different? There he is, the proud pastor. And he should have been at 82 to accomplish that.
Right.
I wouldn't want it. I threw this one in because religious formation was always an important part of the church, and it was done by the priest most of the time. However, Father Linus Schrems got in contact with Grand Rapids, and every summer 2 sisters came up from Grand Rapids to teach religion to the kids and to get them ready for communion.
It was before him. Because we had him as little kids, and I made first communion
Who
through
was the pastor?
Father Bayanowski.
Really? Okay. But these are 2 sisters from my community, And yes, I did wear a habit like that at one time.
And they
All right.
were Grand Rapids Dominicans that came,
Yes,
even for us.
yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Here's Sister Rudolphine and Sister Lily.
And Sister
Who's the first one?
Oh,
Sister Rudolphine.
Rudolphine.
She was a
Oh,
big
my.
one.
last name was Worm, W-U-R-M.
That lady was condemned.
And then Lily Zam.
Yeah.
I remember Sister Rudolph.
Rudolphine is the taller of
So
two.
she was a bigger one.
This is what I inherited. This was the inside with that wonderful corn husk mustard yellow.
Yep.
And I thought, I can live with this for just so long. So the first year, during Lent, the men's club painted the walls a light color. And I will never forget Mary Daisy and Jean Vashaw coming to church early on Easter, sitting there and looking at those light-colored walls and saying to each other, "Oh, this is what a church should look like." And then you see the carpet. The carpet was a terrible shag rug that was also the colors of that era. And we were going to replace it the second year. And I had samples of carpeting up for the women to look at after their meeting. And I said, there are carpet samples, I want your opinion. So we go up, the Ranville girls, you know, Martha Darrow, Celeste, Rosemary Hartman. No, she was deceased by the time I came here. Rosalie Hartman. So I said, well, you know, here are some samples, different colors. What would you like to see? Martha Darrow. I don't care what you put in here. Just change the damn stuff. And oh, there's all I needed to hear. So we did the second year. We changed the carpet. Again, the work of the men. They took all those pews out, put them in the garage down below, and then put them back in. But again, look at the cinder block.
God, that's ugly.
Isn't it? I know it. This is what it looked like after we painted the walls and changed the carpet. The cross right now is at Church of the Straits. Yeah. When they knew we were going to renovate, their question was, where's that cross going? I said, I don't know, maybe into storage. We want it because it showed the connection of the two churches.
And there's a plaque that says it came from St Anthony.
Is there a plaque? Okay.
Well, the risen Christ is waiting to go along with the cross.
They haven't asked for that, darn it. So, and this is what it looks like now. So, it's been through many stages. And then one of the other things, as you know, is our hall. We broke ground for the hall in the year 2004 in May. And Ken Tyson was one of the people who helped to turn the shovel for the groundbreaking, along with Sally Stillwell, Florence Stillwell. So, that's who we are. Yes, Chris.
Could you talk about, because there's so many of them, all the icons in the church?
Oh, the icons? What do you want me to say?
Why they're there, how they got there, the work of whose hands brought them there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
I guess that's me. They're there because I have a special interest in the early Christian church, the Eastern Orthodox people. And that's the type of art that they do. They do Byzantine icons. And they followed the old method of mixing your own paints with egg yolk and pigment. And I got interested in it, I think, in 1998 and just have kept up with it over the years. And so it has ended up in our church. The one of St. Anthony is Bill Alexander's fault, because he said to me one day, you need to put something on this, because it was the door from the outside originally. So that's how St. Anthony came about. The other one in the Chapel of the Trinity was the work of myself and Jane. And the one in the back, one day Jane said, you need an icon of Mary, and I said, we have statues. And she said, you need an icon. I said, yeah, right. Our Lady of the Straits. I said, there's no such person. Well, there is now. So when she went, that's just how things happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You did a beautiful job on that.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah, Jane did that one. I don't
So
take credit for her.
all of your icons
They're
in the church,
beautiful.
they're beautiful.
But if,
But iconography is a form of prayer,
Mhm.
because you're supposed to be praying all the while that you are painting, and just keeping yourself focused on that piece of religious art, and keep yourself focused on God.
I think someone,
Dennis?
What happened to the old church, the wood frame that was by the
Well, Bill, do you know the answer to that question?
I guess it was raised. It was not in good shape.
Huh? It was old. It was either taken down, but I've also heard there was a fire, but didn't burn down.
No.
Okay. So it was just taken down.
Yeah, I think it was just disabled, just knocked down. It wasn't in great shape.
If you had had your historical village, then it could drag it
Yes.
down to the end of century.
The same thing we found out, Dennis, when we were trying to find a suitable church for the village. The history of the two Protestant churches that became the Church of the Straits. Both of those churches were actually in relatively decent shape, but they were destroyed. They were destroyed. It was a real tough time for me because we had just gotten back from Europe, and my wife and I were looking at buildings 2,000 years old, and came home to a country that couldn't save something 100 years old. So it's one of the things that got me started in the Historic Society. But all those three old churches were destroyed.
there were a bunch of the beams from the old churches that went into building the main.
Yes, I know that. And all the windows, most of the windows are preserved in the Church of the Straits. A couple of them hang in the chapel out at Heritage Village. I don't remember who it was that called me one day and said that there was an antique shop in Petoskey that had a window, a beautiful window, functional still, all three parts intact, that said the Methodist Episcopal Church, Mackinaw City. Well, that's back when the Methodist Episcopal Church was blended. I rushed over there, and sure as the world, here was one of those three-section windows with the opening part, everything intact, and it now hangs inside it's built into the wall of the chapel out at Heritage Village. So there are a few of the artifacts that are around. I'd like to mention one thing. When I was a kid, my family moved a lot, and the foundation for our family was always the church. And that was back in the days, 40s and 50s, when even in the Protestant denomination, a lot of churches didn't talk to one another. The Catholics certainly didn't talk to the Protestants, and so forth and so on. Come here to Mackinaw City. My good friend Reed Nelson sitting out here tonight, and we're going to get you to do one of these, Reed, on the Bible Church. Sister Chris, Dave, the pastor at the Church of the Straits. I've never been anywhere where the churches work together like they do in this community. It may be the uniqueness and the smallness of who we are, but it's a marvelous thing. It's an absolutely marvelous thing. Chris, I want to thank you. By the way, if you're not aware of this, in addition to patrolling the halls of the church for all these years, for 16 years now, I think Chris has been on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and she is retiring. And there's going to be a little reception for her. And as I recall, it's going to be
Friday morning.
this Friday morning, this coming Friday, this coming Friday morning at the Chamber office at
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. So it would be a very nice thing to drop in and say hello to Sister Chris and thank her for some of the other things she's done in our community.
Mention there's cookies in the back.
Okay, I'm supposed to mention there are cookies in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Cabin fever dinner.
And get a brochure up front.
Thank you for coming. Great audience.
Well, Carol, if you want to take them to the back.
Chris, you want your book back?
No, you can have that.
Can I?
That's all they said. What about coffee?